Coming up on Unpacked.
Go and do the 6-week course, live the glamorous life of a flight attendant. We take off, and then really quickly things started happening. The captain jumped in, levers were pulled, and then we just immediately lost power. I remember the ground coming very close, and I'm like, okay, cool, assume the brace position, because here we go.
Surviving a plane crash while being a flight attendant. Today's guest is here to share her story. Let's unpack. Rudelle Oosthuizen is a deputy principal at a creative school in Johannesburg who also doubles as a tarot card reader. Before she changed vocations, she worked as a flight attendant at South African Airways. It was during this time that the airplane she was working in crashed. This is part 1 of her story. Let's unpack. Rudelle, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome being here.
So take us back to what got you interested in working on a plane.
Yeah, it's not something that most people aspire to be, I can guarantee you.
You'll be surprised. The part about the travel and wanting to, see the world for your job is very appealing.
Yes. That's not necessarily what appealed me to it at the start. We actually lived across the road from flight attendants when I was in my matric year. And when you do those aptitude tests?
Yes.
So it was like production and then lawyer. And my dad was like, I'll pay for you if you go study law. And I was like, well, I have a conscience, so I can't do that.
Because you don't want to represent criminals?
No.
I got you.
Yes.
I got you.
And so then I started just chatting to the girls that lived across the road from us. They flew for one airline at the time that is no longer in existence, I don't think. And they were like, if you do a 6 weeks course, then you can start working straight away. So the whole thought behind it was, I'll go and do the 6-week course, live the glamorous life of a flight attendant, and then maybe do something else part-time, because I'm a creative as well, so I could write part-time or whatever. And that's then what basically got me interested in it, yeah.
So how was the 6-week course?
It was very good. I started in January of 2008. Yes. And we've moved along from then. But yes, January 2008, and got my license as a cabin crew member. And by June of that year, I was flying.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it happens that quickly.
Yes.
And what were some of the criteria that you were surprised to discover are for cabin crew members?
Well, the level of first aid that we had to do, because they do teach you to, for instance, if someone goes into labor,
yes,
to possibly deliver a baby, and, the firefighting and sort of the emergency training behind it, because we only ever see the face of being a flight attendant. But there's a lot of the safety aspects that also go into it, which was very revealing.
Okay, so now you start to fly, and how were those initial experiences? And was it domestic, or did you also do international?
It was regional, so we went into up until about Zambia and then also Madagascar. But yeah, it was, I think what initially shocked me was how short the turnaround times are between flights, because you would land somewhere, disembark the passengers in about 10 minutes, and 10 minutes after that you'd embark passengers again, and then you're off again. So initially that was quite an interesting thing that you don't normally think about before you do it. But the crew are amazing, and very quickly you start forming those bonds between the other flight attendants and the captains and so on.
So usually when one of those regional flights travels, how big is the crew? How many of you are there?
It depends on the plane. So the company that I worked for had 3 planes at the time. The one was a 29-seater, the other one was about 37 seats. So for those ones, you only need 1 flight attendant on board, and then the 2 pilots, so the captain and the first officer. But then for the bigger planes, I think they went up to about 100.
Yes.
So then we would have 2, maybe 3 flight attendants on board, depending on how fully booked the flights were.
Okay, so now you've been flying, but then you get to that specific day. What was going on that day?
So to talk about that day, I would actually have to go a day before.
Yes.
Because it was a night stop, or a layover. So we flew the day before, which was the 23rd of September of 2009. We flew from Johannesburg to Pietermaritzburg. That was our planned night stop. So we were going to spend the night there, and the next morning we were going to fly from Pietermaritzburg back to Joburg. And then, it was a weird one, because Pietermaritzburg, the way that it's shaped around the mountains and everything, sometimes when the weather is bad, you can't land. So we did about 3 go-arounds trying to see if we could land. And I remember feeling very tired that night, because when they do the go-arounds, it's not just a quick 2-second turnaround like you would in a car.
It's not a U-turn with a car, yes.
No, it's like a U-turn around a mountain pass. So I remember like leaning against the bulkhead while being in my jump seat and just
What is a bulkhead? What is a jump seat?
Okay.
Just so we're all familiar with the terms.
Yes. So the jump seat is what we refer to, what the crew would sit in. So the flight attendants would have a jump seat. It's normally one that has like the panel under your butt would flip down.
Yes.
And then you would be strapped to a harness.
Yes.
So that when you jump up, the panel that's under you closes immediately. So I think that's where the word came from. And then the bulkhead would be like the panels that are within the cabin.
I got you.
So like walls, I guess. So I was leaning against them, because every time they do one of these U-turns, if you will, it's a lot of gravity and stuff. And it was just like, I wish this would be over. And we did it about 3 times, if I remember correctly, before they said, there's no way we're going to land, so we're going to divert to Durban, which then meant that we weren't going to spend the night in Pietermaritzburg anymore. We go where the plane goes, so we were going to sleep in Durban. And then the plan was the next morning to fly from Durban to Pietermaritzburg and then resume the original scheduled duties for that day.
Okay, so you guys do that, land in Durban. What happens next?
Very disgruntled passengers who would have to then get on a bus, obviously, to go to Pietermaritzburg, which is where they wanted to go. It was quite late at night. I think we got to the hotel at about 10, maybe 10:30, trying to catch the last little bit of dinner, but I was too tired, so I just went directly to sleep. Everybody was tired and kind of miserable. Diversions are never fun for us either, for the passengers who are watching. So we went to bed, and then the next morning, our sign-on was at about 6:30 maybe. So, then we went off to the airport at Durban.
So what then took place when it's time for takeoff at Durban?
So there were a few failed engine starts. So just to give you a little bit of background, normally with any plane, they would start the left engine first after the doors have been closed.
Yes.
Make sure that everything's running there, and then they would start the right engine and then, get pushed back or, start taxiing to take off. And I remember there being an issue with the left engine. The engineers came on board at some point to chat to the crew, and because the head office of the airline is in Joburg and most of the maintenance crew is also in Joburg, the plan was then, okay, let's see if we started the right engine first, if that would help. Let's just get the plane to Joburg, and then we'll do a plane swap, like leave that plane over there and then hop onto another one to resume the day's duties. So that was the plan.
And was this the same plane you guys had landed in the day before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was exactly the same one.
Okay, so now there's a failed engine start and you guys try to swap things around, and what happens?
So because there were no passengers on this flight, I should have led with that. Because we were taking the plane to Pietermaritzburg, I was invited to sit in the cockpit with the 2 pilots. So when they then did the engine start with the right engine first, things seemed to be going well. So they started the left engine, everything seemed to be going well. problem was sorted. So.
And were you the only flight attendant?
Yes.
Part of the crew? So it was just 3 of you?
Yes.
Okay.
So this was one of the smaller planes, the 29-seater. And yeah, so we taxied. I just made triple sure that all of the trolleys were stowed away, that nothing was going to, like jostle when you take off or anything. And then I got strapped into the cockpit, which is actually quite a treat because as flight attendants, you never really get to see.
From that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, so the plane is very small. I mean, it's a propeller plane. So that the door of the cockpit is actually my backrest.
Oh, I got you. Yes.
With the harness on, and then flip the seat down, and off we went to the runway.
On your way to Pietermaritzburg?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then what happens?
So we take off, and immediately, like when you go through a little bit of turbulence and the plane sort of shakes around, I remember feeling that.
Was this now when you've actually lifted off the ground or
Yes.
you lifting off the ground?
It's just as we lifted off.
Yes.
Yeah, so I remember feeling, okay, I didn't realize it was a windy day because obviously I'm not a pilot, so I don't know what to look for. And then really quickly, things started happening. Alarms started going off in the cockpit itself. And I didn't have a headset on because I'm not a pilot again. They all have their own headsets. So I didn't really know what was happening. I couldn't hear what they were saying to each other. But I do remember their body language. It was the first officer's takeoff. They do tend to swap those just so that everybody gets a chance to actually take off and land a plane. And she seemed to have everything under control. And then, the captain jumped in, levers were pulled, and then we just immediately lost power. Like the nose just took a dive like that.
And in that time, you are not aware what's going on. Are you hearing anything that lets you know something changed in the sound or the feel of the plane?
The only thing that really rang an alarm bell for me were the alarms that were going off. So I remember one particular flashing red light on the panel, and some of the alarms were going off. And then as soon as we lost power and the captain took over the flight, that's when I realized, okay, something is really wrong. Because at first I thought we were just going through turbulence.
Yes.
So I would find out later that when he had pulled a lever, it was actually cutting the fuel to the wrong engine. So what had happened as we took off, the right engine was smoking.
Yes.
And he ended up cutting the fuel going to the left healthy engine.
As opposed to the right engine.
Yes. So a plane is designed to take off on one engine because these things do, not happen often, but they do happen every once in a while. So if the right engine's fuel line, because obviously if it's on fire, then we have to cut the fuel.
Yes.
So it made sense what he did. And if he had cut the correct engine, we would have been able to take off, do a go around and land again.
Yes.
But now with essentially no engines guiding the plane, we were just the glorified hand glider at that point.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So now, obviously you found that out later.
Yes.
What was your understanding of what was happening? I mean, as the plane was starting to take a nosedive, were you in panic mode?
I had a very interesting thought flash through my head. As I shared with you previously, when you do your cabin crew training, you're put through drills, right?
Yes.
So they put you through these drills to kind of how the words that you're meant to say in an emergency situation. And I remember when I noticed the plane go down and I could feel that there wasn't any power in the plane, like powering the plane. I had a very interesting thought, which was, I don't know how to fly a plane, so I guess I'll deal with whatever happens when we're on the ground, because that's essentially what I was trained for. So there was a very interesting thought that had flashed through my head. But essentially what we're meant to do as cabin crew is if there is an emergency situation, whether it's the oxygen masks that are deployed or whatever, you secure the cabin, and then when the plane lands, you get people off the plane. So that's...
And what does securing the cabin mean?
So to make sure that emergency exit ways would be clear, so that because depending on how big the plane is, like some of those big A380s, the flight attendants on board are meant to, in an emergency situation, get the passengers off in 90 seconds.
Wow.
So for a plane that can take upwards of 400 passengers, they have to get everybody off in 90 seconds. So by securing the cabin, you would make sure that the emergency exit ways are clear. You would make sure that there's nothing loose hanging around that people can trip over, because if someone trips over, then they trip other people over. That people are strapped in, and that kind of thing.
Okay, so now you have this thought that crosses your mind, and you're basically telling yourself, I'll deal with whatever I can when we land.
Yes.
Yes.
Because I can't help them in this situation. And so I essentially was just along for the ride. Not to be too facetious, but, strapped in. And I'm like, okay, cool, assume the brace position, because here we go. And it happened very quickly. Later, again, I would find out the flight only lasted about 48, 49 seconds.
Wow.
So this was, it's interesting to me, the brain's capacity of absorbing everything that's happening to you in that situation. Because I can talk about the 48 seconds for hours.
Yes, and how you interpret time while the situation is happening around you.
Exactly. So I assumed the brace position, and then I remember the ground coming very close. And I looked away on impact and kind of hit my head against one of the panels next to me that had buttons on it, because they have so many buttons in a cockpit. And then I lost consciousness for, I would lie to you if I said it was 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 seconds.
So impact happens. When you come to, are you aware that the plane has crashed?
I wasn't immediately aware. It was a very strange, it felt like a dream.
Yeah.
So I remember waking up from this dream, I suppose, and looking around, going, why would I dream that a plane has gone down and the people sitting with me in the cockpit, they're bleeding? Why would I dream that? That's such an absurd dream to have.
Yes.
And that's when it slowly started coming back to me.
Of, oh my gosh, this is happening.
Yeah, this is real. And I remember trying to communicate with them. And in that moment, realizing that what had actually woken me up was the captain's sort of laborious breathing, which I will not reenact because it'll give you nightmares. And he was also obviously concussed, so I tried communicating with the first officer, who wasn't responding to me. And then I had another strange thought. There were many of these. Am I in limbo? Did I die and I'm in limbo and I'm a ghost and no one can hear me?
Oh, I can so get that, because you're talking, the only other two people, you're talking to them and they're not responding back. That must have been so scary.
Yeah, it was kind of. It's not something that that I would ever wish on anyone.
Yeah.
And then the first responders on scene, because we ended up landing. So impact was in an open field across the road from a school. But we skidded with the momentum kind of across the road and into the school's palisade fencing. So this is the 24th of September, which is Heritage Day. So there were no kids at school. Kind of a perfect accident if you think about it. No passengers on board, no kids at the school. But obviously the people who lived in the area, they heard this happening. So the first responders on scene then started talking through the window to both myself and the first officer and asking us, where is the fire extinguisher? Because the wing is smoking. And that's when my training kicked in. And I was like, okay, there are so many fire extinguishers here, so I can tell you where to go. They then managed to extinguish what wasn't actually a fire, it was just the smoking engine.
And this was now the right engine that was smoking the whole time that we wanted to cut fuel from going to, but we cut fuel to the wrong engine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
How did they even enter the plane to get a fire extinguisher?
So the plane kind of broke apart in the middle by the wing section, which they told us. And I was like, well, I guess you can go, because I was trying to explain how they would open the door, thinking in a normal situation we would be on our wheels, but that's not the case, because they did actually pull the undercarriage up when we took off. And yeah, so the plane had broken apart in the middle by the wings, and they had gone in to get the fire extinguisher. Then, because of how small the plane is and how small the windows are in the cockpit, in an emergency situation, you know, the captain will obviously go through the window. But now we are sitting with two people who have been gravely injured. So I knew the only way for them to get out was for me to be removed.
Because you're on the door.
Yes, I'm strapped to the door. So then I started talking to people, and I was like, okay. I was very aware of the fact that something was wrong with my back. I don't know how I know this, but
because you couldn't move.
Yes, I was still strapped into the door, still in the brace position during this whole time. My legs had kind of gone into the console where they have all the levers. So I had torn, I remember being very annoyed that I had torn my stockings from that impact. And yeah, so I was just sitting there knowing that something is wrong without really knowing how. So I tried to say to them, okay, in order for you guys to get to these two who clearly have more wrong than what I have, I need to be removed out of the door and the doorway. But if you open the door, then I don't know what you're going to do to my back because I'm strapped to the door. So, yeah, that was an interesting conversation then, because I realized I was going to have to explain to them how to kind of get into the cockpit through a side way to cut the harness off me and then open the door, which is then what I ended up doing when the paramedics arrived. They were quite quick to respond. I mean, that helicopter was there after I was taken off pretty quickly. But yeah, the paramedics were there quickly as well.
So what was happening in the field where you landed? I mean, how were their first responders so quickly?
So I assume because the school was close by, there were probably houses close by as well. I mean, it was a suburban area in Merebank in Durban. So someone must have been home because it was a public holiday. People were, I've never actually thought of that. People were home getting ready for Braai Day. And yeah, there was also a municipal worker that we hit on the ground who was busy trimming around the fence, but they would only find him later because he was under one of the wings.
Yes, of the plane, yes. So at what point were you then removed from the plane, and do you recall what state you were in?
Yes, so paramedics arrived. I explained to them how to get into the cockpit through that little sideway to cut the straps. They opened the door, immediately lifted me onto a stretcher because I said to them, something's wrong, you're going to have to secure me somehow. So they immediately lifted me onto a stretcher and then took me out again through this break in the plane, which was quite interesting when you are lying like that to look at the plane from that angle and to go through a crack in the fuselage. And yeah, so they got me out, and then immediately the other paramedics went in to tend to the other two that were in the cockpit still.
And this whole time they were unconscious and not speaking, not responsive? The
first officer did start responding at some point, but the last I saw of the captain, he wasn't responsive. He was in too much pain. Yeah, he'd essentially gone completely into the whole front panel. So, yeah, I think between the two of them, the paramedics probably did find a way to communicate with them. But I do know that the captain was the last one out of the plane and that they had to use the jaws of life.
Yes, to remove him.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So when you leave the scene on your way to the hospital, what do you remember seeing? What did you notice that stood out for you?
So they had put me in a neck brace. So I couldn't really turn my head. I only had the company of the paramedic that was standing by my side. asking him, what does the plane look like? And shame, they were probably not wanting to traumatize me further, so they kept saying, no, don't worry about that now. Let's just wait for the helicopter to arrive and, we'll airlift you to hospital. So the only thing that really stood out for me from being carried out of the plane and waiting for the helicopter was, I've never been on a helicopter before. So as I said, so many strange thoughts that just land in your brain during situations like that. So the helicopter arrived, I was put into the helicopter, and then I asked the paramedic, can you reach my phone in my pocket? And he's like, don't worry about stuff like that now. And I was like, I just really want to phone my mom, though, because she has my car. She was going to come collect me, and she might want to know that I'm not going to be there.
So did the paramedic make the call for you?
Yes, he did. So I remembered my mom's number at the time out of my head when we still had to remember numbers. And he put me on speaker, and I said to her, Mom, I've been in a plane accident. And she probably was too shocked to immediately respond, because I remember thinking, are you still there? And she's like, yeah, I'm here. And sorry.
It's okay.
I didn't realize that was going to crack me up.
It's okay.
But yeah, so then the paramedic took over the conversation to say to her, we'll contact you as soon as she's at the hospital. And so from my mom's perspective, she always tells the story. She got the phone call, and then drove to the closest garage to go get airtime, because she didn't have airtime on her phone. And then phoned my dad to tell him, and then phoned the airline. So I don't know if she was the one to break it to the airline or...
Probably. It's possible. Yeah.
Because they didn't think that anybody knew, obviously, that this had just happened. But yeah, so she was like, you're going to have to make a plan to get me to my daughter, essentially. That was the phone call with them. And unbeknownst to me, because I was being carted off to the hospital, I think at this point the adrenaline had kicked in properly, because I remember laughing and saying to the paramedics things like, I've never been on a helicopter before. This is cool. I wish I could be sitting up for this. And then landing at the hospital and being taken into the emergency section of the hospital. Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing what happens to the human body and mind in moments of crisis and trauma, where people will be like, why would she be laughing? It's like the shock does such crazy things to a person. The fact that you're like, this is so cool, I'm going to be in a helicopter. It sounds crazy, but I completely get it. So now you get in the helicopter. Are you conscious the entire ride?
Yes. Yeah.
And was it cool?
It was really cool. Also, the only time I'd ever been on a helicopter.
In your whole life?
Yeah, I need to change that.
Yeah. So you arrive at the hospital, you're taken to casualty.
Yes.
When do you realize how bad or severe your injuries are? Because at that time, you kind of knew something was wrong, but you didn't know what had happened to you.
Yes. It was mostly the hospital staff, I would say. I could notice that they were a little bit more worried than I was. And I'm like, why are we worried? Because adrenaline's kicked in, I feel great.
Yes.
And that's when I realized that, okay, something was clearly wrong with my eye, because I told them that I have contact lenses in, and maybe they should think about removing that at some point. So this one was easy to take out because they could see it, but this one they couldn't find in my eye. And I was like, how can you not find a contact lens when it's so clearly on the color parts of my eye, you know? And they kind of had to go on a fishing expedition, which they eventually got out. And I was like, okay, something must be wrong with my face. And when they started cutting my clothes off me, meaning they didn't feel from my response to being jostled in the stretcher and being put on the bed, I remember my left arm was quite sore. So they thought, okay, this must be broken. So we're going to not remove clothes the traditional way. We're actually just going to come in with scissors. And that's when it kind of dawned on me, okay, this is real. Whatever's happened is bad, because obviously planes are meant to fly. They're not meant to crash that way. And yeah, that kind of tipped me off.
Next time on Unpacked.
He made eye contact with me and then went and walked away. The doctors were worried that I was never going to walk again. We're the only 3 people who knew what happened to each other. So to lose one of those people was sad. PTSD is a very strange beast. Planes are meant to fly, so as long as they are allowed to fly, then they will fly.
Thank you so much for watching Unpacked with Relebogile Mabotja. Make sure you subscribe to my channel where you can get to watch more episodes. But more importantly, you can be part of our online community. Comment down below, share with us who you'd like to see on the show, what story you'd like us to discuss. We love engaging with you. Keep it coming and don't forget to subscribe.